once again. I'm Imran Gata and you're in the stream. Today, can democracy and Islam coexist? We talk to one group that's taking its fight against religious extremism to the streets of Pakistan. Our digital producer Ahmed Shihabuddin is here looking out for your live feedback. Hi Ahmed. Joining him on the couch is Harun Mughal, who's a senior editor at Religion Dispatches. It's a daily online magazine that analyzes religious forces in the world today. Welcome to the program, Harun. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the issue. Now, you can tell us what stories you want us to cover, and you can tweet us your ideas using the hashtag AJStream. We'll get to our discussion in just a few moments, but first, here's Ahmed, who's been checking out all your feedback.
Saudi billionaire Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, a major investor in some of the world's top media companies, has added Twitter to his list after buying a $300 million stake in the company. Now, the prince is estimated to be worth around $20 billion. He's already has several stakes in several other Fortune 500 companies. But this deal in particular is leading many to speculate on his motives. Now, this tweet, "Why silence an opposition when you can buy it out?" says Rami Yaqub of the Twitter deal. And many have suggested that it's odd for Saudi Arabia to invest money in technologies that are seen to promote individual freedoms. It's like McDonald's investing in a heart hospital, Anand writes on Twitter. And this caricature of the prince captures some of the fears about what the deal might mean for Twitter's political independence. There you can see a slightly frightened version of the Twitter bird sitting on his arm. And some other images, such as these, of newly imagined Twitter logos have been circulating online as well. It's worth mentioning that Arabic is the fastest growing language on Twitter and has seen a 200% increase in the past 12 months. Now, one user named Faisal Abbas wrote this short message to the company. He says, "Dear Twitter, the kingdom's ad agency will send you tech specs now. From tomorrow, your colors are to be green." If anything, it's certain that the prince's investment in Twitter confirms the growing significance of social media in today's news and information industry. Now, remember, if you want your ideas to be covered in the show, send them to us using the hashtag AJStream.
I'm Michael Tarazi. I'm a Palestinian-American lawyer and a supporter of human rights around the world, and I'm in the stream.
Now, religious extremism and violence have killed tens of thousands of people in Pakistan over the past few years. In fact, 35,000 Pakistanis have died from extremist violence since 9/11. Its army is at war with the Taliban. Many say Pakistan is in serious trouble. So what's being done? What can be done? A group called Khudi, meaning self-esteem in Urdu, calls itself a counter-extremism movement that is working to promote a democratic culture in Pakistan. Khudi activists are taking their message of tolerance to the people of the country, and sometimes they've had to face hostile crowds. Let's listen to what one of the founders of Khudi, Majid Nawaz, who was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, and let's listen to what he has to say, because he was in jail for many years and he was a self-described extremist before, he says, he changed.
So the vacuum that we realized, what we noticed, was the absence of a grassroots movement working with the Pakistani youth to empower these youth towards a democratic change. Once again, create that democratic consensus in society. And it's for that purpose and to create that platform that we established Khudi. Khudi is a social movement. Khudi is
Now, joining us via Skype is Imran Khan, who's the head of Khudi's counter-extremism training. Welcome to the stream. Imran, it's an interesting title that you have there. Extremism seems to be a symptom of many micro issues, geopolitical issues, very big issues. How is it possible to make a difference in fighting a concept like extremism at the grassroots level?
Right. I think to fight extremism, religious extremism that we are facing in Pakistan, we have to have a coherent counter narrative which should be the antidote to the narrative that the extremist organizations and groups have been propagating in Pakistan for decades. So it's imperative that our narrative is stronger than their narrative, and we work at the grassroots level to refute their narrative and to convince people about the veracity of our narrative.
What is your ultimate agenda? And the reason I ask is because Khudi is an offshoot of the Quilliam Foundation in Britain. And we know that for a few years, the Quilliam Foundation was actually funded by the British Home Office, effectively by the British government. You had Majid Nawaz, who we saw there, Ed Hussein, Jemima Khan, and others involved. It had faced some criticism as being a sort of mouthpiece for a British government-sponsored version of Islam. What sort of relationship is there still with the Quilliam Foundation and that link to the British government?
Right. So let me clarify that Khudi is not an offshoot of Quilliam Foundation. Khudi and Quilliam are sister organizations. Khudi is an independent organization that we are trying to register in Pakistan with the Pakistani government. And most of Khudi leaders are from Pakistan, like myself. We are based in Pakistan. We were born and raised in Pakistan. But yes, the founder of Khudi is also the founder of Quilliam Foundation. But the policies that we make, I mean, the agenda that we set, that is set with the consensus of the leadership committee. And most of Khudi members, Khudi leaders are based in Pakistan. As for the agenda of Khudi, our agenda is to propagate a counter narrative in the Pakistani youth that is very vulnerable to extremist recruitment, and to talk about religious and political pluralism, to talk about democratic culture that is missing in Pakistan. Our ultimate agenda is promoting democratic culture in Pakistan and countering religious extremism.
Okay.
On that note, you mentioned youth. We have a young woman in Pakistan, Sumaya, who's asking what religious leaders are doing to actually counter this. Let's take a listen.
Assalamu alaikum. Regarding extremism in Pakistan, my question is to the religious leader. I would really like to know what they are doing in order to educate the masses about extremism, because I'd really, especially, first of all, like to bring your attention to a group which is called Jamaat al-Dawa. And these people are apparently labeled as the terrorist group in Pakistan, but they are the ones who are actually doing the most philanthropic work, and they are doing effective social NGO throughout the country. So what exactly is our religious leadership doing about educating the people about extremism in Pakistan?
Imran, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard the question. Unfortunately, there are very few religious scholars who are doing some work to counter extremism. Javed Ghamidi is one such religious scholar, but unfortunately he had to leave the country because he was facing threats from extremists. Tahirul Qadri is another religious scholar who has given an 800-page fatwa against terrorism, all kinds of terrorism. He has categorically denounced suicide bombing, he has denounced terrorism. Then we have religious scholars like Khalid Zaid, but I have to admit that there are fewer religious scholars who are against extremism. And unfortunately, there are quite a few who are associated with extremist organizations.
Okay, I want to bring Harun in here because, Harun, Pakistan's a country of what, 170 million people. It's a big country, different nuances depending on place to place. It has been argued that Pakistan, there are two Pakistans. One is an army with a geography, as it relates to the outside world as the nation state, and the other one is a loose collection of different people under this very loose umbrella. Is there a sense that it's very different between, say, somebody who's urban in Lahore and somebody who's in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the northwest frontier province? So, for example, it's easier to theoretically reject extremism if you're living in the city in Lahore, but it might be a little bit different if you were living in the northwest frontier province and the state has provided you with nothing, no infrastructure, no education, and some of your family members might have died as a result of a US drone attack.
Yeah, I mean, Pakistan it's a huge country. It's a very diverse country. I think people look at Pakistan and sometimes they want to create an analogy to, you know, one of the Arab countries or something like that. But, you know, there's multiple ethnicities. There's very different economic forms of life. And I think another challenge in Pakistan is that the idea of Pakistan itself is a very confusing one. I often compare Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, to Barack Obama. He was kind of like all things to all people. And when the movement for Pakistan started, everyone came around this man because everyone had a different idea of what Pakistan was supposed to be. So I think it'd be interesting to learn what Khudi sees as the ideal of Pakistan. What is Pakistan supposed to become?
Okay, well, before we pose another video question, let's ask Imran, what is the ideal of Pakistan? What's your ideal vision for Pakistan, both religiously and in terms of how the society must work?
Well, the ideal vision of Pakistan for Khudi is a country where where all people, where all citizens have equal political and religious rights, where people belonging to minorities such as Christians, Hindus, or for that matter, minority sects in Islam like Shias and Ahmadis are not discriminated against. A country where there is social justice, where there is equality, where people have the right to propagate their political ideas, where people have freedom of association, and where the state is not theological, where the state is not necessarily propagating an identity that is not acceptable to, let's say, people living in Balochistan.
Okay,
right?
A pluralistic secular state with freedom of religion and respect of religion. Point well made, Ahmed.
Well, you know, we have many people who sent us video questions, and one actually talking about the fact that the extremists control so much of the country. And this one's for you from Naeem Shamim. Let's listen in.
Good evening. My name is Naeem Shamim. I work for alupaks.com. My question to today's panelist is that Pakistan has legislated persecution of its minorities in 1974 and 1984, and since then it has been the mullahs who have been successful enough to pressurize the governments to first of all legislate these laws and then to hold upon them. How would any setup in Pakistan get rid of these extremist elements who actually control the armed forces now, the judiciary, and even the democratically elected institutions? Thank you very much.
What do you think, Harun? I mean, Naeem there saying that it's built into the fabric of the leadership of the country, so it's not just, you know, rotten apples. That's what he thinks.
Yeah, I think this idea of Pakistan has become so interlinked with extreme nationalism, opposition to India. There are a lot of conspiracy theories in the air. And then, as you pointed out, I think very rightly, foreign policy. So America's relationship to Pakistan is inseparable from the rise of extremism. We look at what's been happening in Pakistan and Afghanistan for the last 30 years, and the United States is part of that process. So one thing that's very interesting to me is, you know, firstly, what is extremism? And secondly, how do you fight extremism at the grassroots? And I would ask Imran this, when extremism is, in the words of Imran Khan, who a lot of Pakistanis are looking towards as a source of political hope, is something that is being sustained or at least increased by Pakistan's relationship to the United States and the war in Afghanistan.
Imran, do you want to chime in on that?
Yes. The way we are trying to counter extremism in Pakistan is we are trying to we have reached out to almost 10,000 young people in Pakistan over the last 2 years. We go to universities where we organize these countering extremism workshops, wherein we give students a platform to discuss issues such as democracy, democratic culture, whether Islam is compatible with democracy or democratic culture. And we try to convince them that yes, Islam is compatible with democracy, Islam is compatible with separation of religion and politics. And after these workshops, we always have students, and these workshops are, by the way, organized on colleges and universities, because so far we've been targeting colleges and universities. So after every workshop, there are students who come up to us and who tell us that they want to volunteer for us. Then we set up a chapter in that district. Yeah.
Imran, if you don't mind me jumping in there, democracy itself is a hot potato, isn't it? Because democracy for many Pakistanis means dynastic politics. So they have a choice of military dictatorship on the one hand and dynastic politics on the other. When Benazir Bhutto was assassinated, the PPP, which is seen as a democratic party, goes and names her teenage son as her party successor. That's not very democratic, is it? So even within that word of democracy, do you foresee a lot of hard work down the road?
I think in Pakistan we've had intermittent military coups, and that's why democracy has not been given enough time to evolve. Democratic political parties have not been given enough time. So that's why our democracy is not at all perfect. It has a long way to go, but still, it's, as they say, worst democracy is better than best dictatorship. So I admit that our democracy is perhaps not the perfect. It is definitely not the perfect, but with the passage of time, if we give our political parties the time, I think this dynastic politics will end.
On that note, Harun, I want to come back to you because you mentioned what is deemed extremism, and we have this echoing tweet from Osiris322 saying, why do we consider it, quote, extremism when ordinary people defend their homes, families from any attack by a foreign power? And then we also put out the question as to whether Pakistani politicians use anti-American sentiment for their own gain. And this is one of the many tweets that came in, Faiza Tahir saying, they shout the all-popular anti-American slogans while their kids are either studying there or making fortunes. So what do you make about this, the role of the US that you brought up, and how we actually characterize what extremism is?
It's a huge problem because in Pakistan, you have an ostensibly secular elite that's very liberal and westernized and knows how to say the right things. But they're very often in bed with the extremist groups they claim to be fighting. In some cases, in the last several years, and even further back, the Pakistani government has used the threat of extremism to get more money and more aid from the United States and other countries. So part of the problem is when we have this conversation, when we use the words secular and extremist and religious and pluralistic, we get stuck and we're not looking at the power dynamics of how people who claim to be secular are using religious movements in order to advance their own agendas. And this is a problem we saw in the Arab world as well, too.
Yeah, what's interesting that you say people are using religious movements to advance their own agenda. Here with Khudi, we're seeing, and if you look at my screen here, it says, beware of extremism in religion, for extremism destroyed those who went before you. And it's a quote from the Prophet Muhammad, which is a part of this campaign. So they are promoting a more pluralistic, gentler interpretation of Islam as the answer. It's not saying, we reject religion. On the other hand, you have politicians who play this game of demagoguery, don't they? And they go out there and they project themselves as defenders of Islam. A lot of people give the example of Zia-ul Haq in Pakistan. Then it becomes relative. Doesn't it become very difficult then to choose who's right, whose interpretation is right?
It becomes relative and it becomes confusing because as much as religion shapes Pakistan, Pakistan itself shapes religion. So a lot of clergy are also responding to what's actually happening on the ground. In a lot of cases, they're not leading Pakistanis, Pakistanis are leading them. So, as an example, we see extremist interpretations of religion as the source of extremism, and I think this is what Ahmed was pointing to. But at the same time, as you're pointing out, we think that moderate interpretations of religion will solve the problem. And so what I'm wondering is, perhaps that's a little bit too easy of an equation. And I actually just got a tweet, and it's a little bit, shall we say, fiery in nature, but
please read it out.
Anjum Chaudhry, who I'm sure we've all heard of, says Majid Nawaz is a known agent of the British government pushing their agenda. Now, one thing I'd be interested in hearing from Imran is, how do these relationships make it harder for Khudi? He said that the majority of Khudi's leaders are from Pakistan, but all someone has to do from one of these extremist groups is say, the guy who founded this organization is a Westerner, and he has a think tank in the West, and he works with Western governments. So he's pushing a Western agenda, and he's using religion to do that.
Let's ask Imran, is that one of the reasons perhaps why a lot of people might be skeptical of you?
Yes, I admit that we face such criticism in Pakistan, but let's not forget that Majid Nawaz is not a Westerner. He is a British Pakistani. His family is from Pakistan, and in 1999, when he was working for Hizb ut-Tahrir, he came to Pakistan and he co-founded the group Pakistan. So he feels that it's his responsibility to make up for the mistakes that he made, because he played a role in spreading extremism in Pakistan. Coming back to the issue, yes, we face such criticism, but we believe in a world where we are interconnected with the world, right? So if international community is supporting Khudi, I think there's nothing wrong with that. International community also supports our army when our army carries out military operation in Sawat.
Okay.
So our government is funded by aid from the American government. So I think we are all interdependent on others, and there is no harm in helping each other and seeking help from the international community.
Okay, I want to ask one final question of Harun before we move on to the stream leads section regarding education. We keep talking about education. Recently, the Pakistani madrasas were in the news. Those kids were all shackled and found in a terribly disheveled state. In the lack of a state leviathan providing education for these people. We know these madrasas are probably the only place where many of these children can actually get an education, learn to read or write. I dare ask, is not the root of all of this education, starting from the bottom up, the government needing to provide education to its people so that there's no vacuum for some of the more hardline madrasas to work within?
I think that's definitely part of the problem. I would just caution that we often equate education and democracy, and then the example of India screws things up, because India maps out in these statistics very similar to Pakistan in terms of rates of illiteracy. And yet India has had a robust and very strong democratic tradition, although they've also had challenges with extremism. I think education is definitely part of it, and I think the missing element of the conversation is the creation of Islamic religious leaders and thinkers who can push back authentically. I mean, Khudi is named after a concept from Iqbal's theory.
Hold that thought. We're going to continue it in the post-show. You can flesh it out. But thanks for the moment, both Imran and Harun. Join us for the post-show for more on this. But before we end the show on TV, Ahmed, give us a taste of some of the other stories we're working on.
Our lead section is meant to give you a quick look at some of the other stories we're following here at the stream today. For our first story, Italian parliamentarian Licia Ronzulli raised eyebrows by bringing her 7-week-old baby to work at the European Parliament in France. Here is a picture of the mother and child as she votes on proposals to improve women's employment rights. Ronzulli says this was not a political move and that she only wanted to draw attention to the difficulties working mothers face. Now, moving on, the new talent show Arab Idol is being criticized for its use of the word idol. An online campaign against the show says the word is un-Islamic because it refers to gods worshipped by heathens, while others argue that idol could simply mean role model. Now, the program is currently broadcast on the Dubai-based network MBC. And our last story comes from Rwanda, where innovative biogas burners are being used to power the country's prisons, all 14 of them. Take a look at this photo from Graham Holliday's blog Kigali Wire. 75% of the energy used in the country's prisons comes from a mixture of human and animal waste. And believe it or not, the biogas kitchen is reportedly odor-free. Now, those are our stream leads for today. To read more about these stories, you could visit stream.aljazeera.com/leads. Vote up the ones that you like, and we could feature them on an upcoming show. Imran?
Thanks for that, Ahmed. Do stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. And before we go, we have to say bye-bye to our producer, Atirath Aik. This is his final show. He's been with us for 5 years. He's leaving us for a building just sort of east down the street. And we wish him all the best. Stay with us, stream.aljazeera.com for the post show. Okay, welcome to the post show on stream.aljazeera.com. We're discussing Pakistan and this group called Khudi, which is, trying to bridge the issues of dealing with extremism and political violence in Pakistan, particularly in the post 9/11 dynamic, the relationship with the United States and other permutations there. We're talking education, about the madrasas in particular. Haroon, you said it's not a kind of zero-sum game, and I think you're quite right. I'm going to allow you to finish the point.
Yeah, I study Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, who a lot of people, I think, across the Muslim majority world have definitely heard of. And one of his key ideas is Khudi, which he took a word that had a negative connotation of selfishness and translated it to mean becoming a real strong individual, someone who doesn't have to look blindly to the past, but can act in the world meaningfully. And one of the interesting things about Khudi, and I would pose this to Imran as well, is that Iqbal says you can never have religious reform. You can never change the state of the Muslim world until and unless you have real political sovereignty. And it's interesting because in the context of foreign policy, what Iqbal was saying is that no one's ever going to be able to answer the hard questions of Islam in the modern world if they feel like their society is not really their own. And I would like to know how that plays into this larger question of extremism.
Imran?
Yes. I mean, when we go out and speak to the Pakistani youth, most of the grievances that the Pakistani youth and Pakistani people have against the West, against the United States, they are because they think that their country is not politically sovereign. And various regimes in Pakistan have been the puppets of the United States. So our answer is that we will have to work hard to make our country internally strong. We will have to progress in science and technology and social sciences, and only then we will be able to become so strong that we will not be relying on the Western countries for aid, and then we can become politically sovereign. So I think, yes, I mean, the political grievances that people in Pakistan have, and extremism, partially it stems from those grievances. That is precisely the lack of sovereignty, and that's why, whenever there are drone attacks, and even when Osama bin Laden was killed in a raid, people in Pakistan were furious, not furious because they said that it was breach of Pakistan's sovereignty.
We have a tweet coming in on the topic of education from one of our community members, Katana Daito, saying the madrasas are feeding the poor, so they then ask the families to give their kids into jihad and they pay them for food. Now, obviously that's an oversimplification, but just trying to perhaps get that point in there. But moving on to the role of language and media perhaps in this, we have a video question from Fiza in London. Let's listen in.
What do you think is the role of language in media in our everyday use, creating this divide between, say, moderate elite versus masses who are not concerned probably, or do you think that's not the correct way of looking at it?
Now, this question came in for you, Imran, I believe, but let's go to Haroon first. Go ahead.
I think the challenge here comes down to how do these words translate into Urdu?
Right.
So if I say moderate and extremist, I'm using a Western language, right? I'm having a conversation that anybody on CNN would recognize, for example.
Right.
But if I go to a madrasa and I say extremist, I say moderate, I use a word like Imran, you used, like secular. Those are really loaded terms. And I think it would be interesting to know from you is how you go beyond the urban setting, beyond urban youth, to populations for whom the madrasa is really the only option or the only meaningful option, or even it might seem like the only institution that actually cares.
First of all, I think it's a fallacy that extremism only flourishes in madrasas in Pakistan. Look at Hafiz Saeed. Hafiz Saeed is the founder of Lashkar-e-Taiba. Hafiz Saeed was a professor at University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore. Other empirical research that has been done about jihadi organizations has found that the ideologues of jihadi organizations, the strategists, a lot of them are university educated. Organizations like Hizb ut-Tahrir have been recruiting people from elite universities like Lahore University of Management Sciences. So Punjab University, which is the biggest university of Pakistan, is the stronghold of an extremist organization that has been controlling the campus for the last 20, 30 years. So I think it's, in my humble opinion, it's a fallacy to believe that extremism only flourishes in madrasas. Yes, the rank and file, the cannon fodder of extremist organization comes from madrasas, but the
That's a fair
leadership
point.
comes from, yeah.
Yeah, fair point. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's
Yes, Ayman
number two is a
al-Zawahiri
doctor.
right.
Many of the 9/11 hijackers were engineers. Fair point. Fair point. Imran, we're gonna leave it there for you. Thank you very much for joining us on this stream. Look forward to talking to you again in the not too distant
Thank you
future.
for having me. Thank you for having me.
Imran Khan
Okay,
joining
bye.
us there via broadband. Before we wrap this up, Harun, something very interesting that one of our producers dug up here is a Pew Research Center poll, which basically had asked people, what do you consider yourself first? So in the US, 46% of those interviewed had considered themselves a Christian, and 46% had considered themselves American before anything else. Obviously, 8% gave different answers or didn't want to respond. In Pakistan, it was fascinating because in Pakistan, 94% of people had identified with themselves as being Muslim first. What does that tell you? Because, as we touched on earlier, saying you're Muslim in Pakistan can mean different things. Yeah. You could say, I'm a Shia Muslim, I'm a Barelvi Muslim, I'm a Deobandi Muslim. And then all the other vestigial issues, follow. What does that tell you?
Well, I think the first part that's interesting is that 3% identify with Pakistani, which I'm sure might just be within the margin of error. So I don't know how that plays out. I think what it really says is that Pakistan as a nationality is really just a religious identity. And this is where it makes it hard to define extremism. Many of the drivers of extremism in Pakistan, many of the groups that have funded some of the terrorist groups and the radical groups are themselves elements of a secular military. Because nationalism and religion just get really wound up together. And then they become really hard to pull apart. I think the way out of this is to find a religious language that doesn't clash with nationalism and that doesn't seek to control politics, but finds positive outlets for religious sentiment.
Of course, Pakistan founded for the Muslim majority provinces at the time of what was India being broken up when the British had left. So I mean, this is it's a bigger historical and even sociological discussion, but there's some interesting stuff there and quite revealing that we can perhaps discuss at a later stage. Harun, thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Stay where you are. We might ask you your thoughts on Kim Jong-il because, of course, the biggest story of the day has been the death of North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. Social media is a huge part of the discussion on his legacy and the future of North Korea. Now, one of the things the online community is talking about, Ahmed?
Well, it's this blog, Kim Jong-il Looking at Things, on tumblr.com. And it's very interesting because you see a series of these photos, as you can see on my screen, perhaps. And there you go. You see that one of him looking into, I believe, an office building. And there's some bizarre ones, just, him looking at cotton and various other images.
Yeah, so let's bring in the guy who created this Tumblr blog, Joao Rocha. He's on Skype. Of course, this Tumblr was a bit, tongue-in-cheek, satirical. Joao, I expect that you've had a very busy day.
Incredibly hectic. Yeah, that would be a good word to describe it.
Why do you think your site was so popular?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I think it's seeing someone that's always portrayed as an absolute evil and a ruthless dictator. And suddenly you're looking at him, looking at such an inoffensive things, everyday situations. I think that explains it a little bit, I would say. But I have no idea, to be honest.
So here's a question for you. You started this just because, one day you caught an image in the newspaper like the Boston Globe and it struck your interest. I'm more curious, after having posted all these images, do you think it gave you any unusual insight into the man that is Kim Jong-il?
My favorite pictures are of the ones where he's actually smiling. it's a bit disconcerting seeing someone that we know is a ruthless dictator just, looking at a watermelon and laughing at it, and everyone around him laughing. There's a certain human touch to those kind of photos, which kind of brings the masks down a little bit. But other than that, I can't really assume too much. This kind of photos are like, they have a purpose, propaganda, so they're heavily edited. So I can't say nothing outside of that.
Joao, it's been lovely to talk to you, and interesting having a look at your site. Kim Jong-il looking at things.tumblr.com. Is that it, Ahmed?
Yeah, Kim Jong-il looking at things.tumblr.com.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Joao. Thanks for joining us on this stream. Fascinating, Harun. Lots of comedy fodder in the past 24 hours. I mean, there's a serious world leader who's died, but somehow social media has just exploded because of, I guess, all the eccentricities that provided the fuel for it that Kim Jong-il had.
We hope that this is the end of that line of goofy dictators, shall we say. I looked at the pictures of Kim Jong-il and I thought of Gaddafi. There are the ruthless dictators, and then there are the ruthless dictators who you can only laugh at. And I think it'd be really interesting to see how this plays out. This is not just an Arab Spring anymore. We're seeing a lot of change in a lot of different parts of the world, and it would be interesting to see how East Asia might be affected by what's going on there. And hopefully Kim Jong-il is the last figure in East Asia who gets that kind of attention and that kind of Tumblr website.
Yeah, Ahmed, if there's one thing, I mean, sort of related to this, it's that particularly with the Arab leaders we've seen, Twitter in particular is used to really mock leaders, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those avenues where people just vent.
Yeah, I think, the fascination around the Tumblr thing is, unlike Twitter, it was a sustained effort. So obviously, it hopefully might be the last one, as you said, although his son, who is, likely to succeed him, already has a website that's similar, Kim Jong-un, looking at things on Tumblr. So perhaps it's not the last.
Yeah, perhaps all the traffic will be directed to that now. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Harun, Ahmed, see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining us on the stream. We talk to Sami Yusuf tomorrow. Hope you join us then. Bye-bye.